A thin veil of mist clung to the gardens of Ravenswick Manor, softening the yellow glow of the lanterns as midnight approached. Above the murmuring guests, a single scream fractured the stillness, sharp, desperate, final. Within moments, the grand hall erupted into panic. At the foot of the marble staircase lay Lord Ambrose Raleigh, his lifeless eyes fixed on the chandelier's cold brilliance. Chapter 1. The Midnight Collapse. The great clock of Ravenswick Manor tolled 12 times, each chime vibrating through the chandeliered hall like a warning knell. Outside, the mist thickened over the expansive grounds, blanching the moonlight and swallowing the silhouettes of hedges and statues. Inside, however, the atmosphere was warm with champagne and chatter. Lord Ambrose Raleigh's annual winter gala was renowned, an evening of polished opulence and subtle rivalries, of glittering jewelry and whispered intrigues, of diplomatic smiles concealing resentments that had fermented for years. Tonight, however, those tensions simmered closer to the surface than usual, though none could have predicted how violently they would break. Hercule Poirot had been invited not as a guest of honor, but as a curious decorative flourish, Lord Raleigh's way of flaunting his connections to Europe's most formidable detective. Poirot, in return, accepted with grace. Social festivities, though not his preferred occupation, often revealed more about human nature than any interrogation room. He stood near a tall arrangement of lilies, observing the ballroom with his usual meticulous calm. Every detail mattered: the slight tremble of a hand, the clipped tone of a greeting, the eyes that avoided meeting another's. To Poirot, such details sang clearer than any orchestra. The orchestra that evening played a refined waltz, its notes gliding across the parquet floor where couples swirled in elegant arcs. Yet the detective's black velvet gaze did not follow the dancers. Instead, it drifted toward a series of interactions that pricked his instincts, tiny fissures in the otherwise smooth presentation of gaiety. Miss Eleanor Fairfax, the poised and statuesque socialite, kept darting quick glances toward the library door whenever she believed herself unnoticed. Sir Malcolm Denwood, his moustache rigid and his temper only slightly less so, downed his third glass of brandy and scowled at every servant who passed him. And Lady Vivian Raleigh, Ambrose's much younger wife, wore a smile so brittle one feared it might shatter at a touch. Poirot allowed none of these observations to interrupt the precise symmetry of his evening. His attire, immaculate as always, reflected his character. A crisp dinner jacket, gleaming shoes, and a tie so perfectly knotted it would have made lesser men weep. He sipped a cup of chocolate rather than champagne, savoring its warmth while watching the room with quiet interest. What, he wondered, lay beneath the social surface tonight? He could sense it, unease, tightly coiled, waiting. Lord Ambrose Raleigh made a grand entrance at 12:15. The host descended the staircase with the pomp one expected from a man who had inherited wealth, title, and a healthy portion of vanity. His silver hair gleamed beneath the chandelier, and his tailored waistcoat strained slightly at the buttons, a testament to the ample indulgence of his lifestyle. Yet despite the lord's extravagant exterior, his expression held something Poirot had not seen in previous months. Tension, guarded and grim. "Mesdames et messieurs," Lord Raleigh called out, spreading his arms with theatrical flourish. "A toast to another year of prosperity, friendship, and above all, truth." Poirot's eyebrow lifted at the last word. Truth? A curious choice for a man who seldom spoke it plainly. Guests raised their glasses, but Poirot noticed a curious pattern. Ambrose's eyes flicked toward three particular individuals as he spoke: Eleanor Fairfax, Sir Malcolm Denwood, and his own wife, Lady Vivian Raleigh. The tension between them pulsed faintly, like electric wire beneath the floorboards. As the toast concluded, Ambrose started down the remaining steps when it happened. the moment that would alter the night irrevocably. A scream tore through the music, sharp enough to freeze every breath in the room. Lady Vivian's hand shot to her throat. A waiter dropped a silver tray, glasses shattering across the polished floor. Poirot turned instantly toward the staircase. Lord Ambrose Raleigh swayed, his hands clawed for the railing, fingers slipping, his face contorted, fear, surprise, perhaps realization, then drained of all expression. Before anyone could reach him, he pitched forward, tumbling down the final steps. His head struck the marble landing with a sickening crack that silenced the orchestra mid-note. The final sound was the dull echo of his body settling. For several seconds, the world seemed to stop. A collective gasp shuddered through the hall. Someone fainted. Others backed away instinctively as though death itself had swept down the staircase. Lady Vivian collapsed to her knees beside the body, shaking uncontrollably. Her sobs were sharp, jagged, almost animalistic. Sir Malcolm rushed forward, attempting to lift the host's head, but Poirot intercepted him with a firm, quiet gesture. "Non," Poirot said softly. "He is dead." The declaration rippled through the room. Poirot crouched beside the body. Lord Raleigh's eyes stared at nothing, their brightness already fading. The detective noted the stiff angle of Ambrose's limbs, the faint discoloration at the lips and the peculiar tightness in his jaw. Not the signs of a man who simply slipped. He touched a gloved hand to the lord's wrist. No pulse. But something else caught his attention, an unusual scent on the man's breath, bitter, almost metallic. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Poirot," muttered Dr. Hawthorne, the aging physician who had attended the gala, kneeling beside him. "A tragic fall. The head wound is severe." Poirot shook his head faintly. "Perhaps, but you will agree, doctor. Something preceded the fall." Hawthorne sniffed the air and frowned. "Yes, this is not right." Guests began to circle closer now, though Poirot rose sharply and snapped, "Please, give space. The room must not be disturbed." Several servants hurried to usher back the horrified onlookers. Poirot's gaze swept the crowd, noting reactions with meticulous precision. Lady Vivian was trembling violently, but something in her posture seemed off. Guilt? Shock? Or both? Sir Malcolm's jaw clenched in a way that betrayed more than concern. His eyes flicked toward Eleanor Fairfax, who stared at the body not with grief but with a curious detachment Poirot recognized from those accustomed to loss, or perhaps responsibility. Poirot addressed them. "If Lord Raleigh fell, it was not by accident." A murmur stirred through the hall like a gust of cold wind. Several guests exchanged frightened looks. Others whispered behind gloved hands. Poirot raised a hand. "Mes amis, calm yourselves. At this moment nothing is certain. But Hercule Poirot does not ignore what is before his eyes." At that very moment a voice pierced the tension. A voice shrill, unsteady, and deeply frightened. I saw it happen," cried a young maid standing near the corner. Her apron quivered as she pointed toward the staircase. "I was at the top. I saw Lord Raleigh. He... Poirot turned sharply. "What did you see, mademoiselle?" She gulped. "He was pushed, monsieur. Pushed, I swear it." A stunned silence followed. Lady Vivian gasped, covering her mouth. Sir Malcolm muttered a curse under his breath. Eleanor Fairfax's expression shifted just slightly into something resembling fear. But Dr. Hawthorne frowned. "Come now, girl, you must have been mistaken. The railing is high. Anyone stumbling—" "I am not mistaken," the maid insisted. Tears pooled in her eyes. "Lord Raleigh was arguing with someone before he fell. I saw a man's arm. He shoved him." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A man's arm? Did you see whose?" "No, monsieur, I was carrying a tray. When I heard them shouting, I looked up, but But I only saw the arm and the shove. Poirot stepped closer, voice gentle. The position, if you please, were they near the landing? Yes, near the top of the final steps. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And the voice? Did you hear words? She hesitated, then whispered, only one. Lord Raleigh said, you cannot deny it any longer. And then he fell. Poirot stood silent for a moment. The wheels of deduction turned swiftly, a contradiction already. The doctor saw a fall. The maid saw a push. The body bore signs of poison. The expression hinted at shock. And Lord Raleigh's final words introduced a secret, one being denied, one worth killing for. Poirot turned toward the guests who hovered anxiously. There will be no leaving Ravenswick Manor tonight. The police will arrive shortly, but until they do, I must ask, which of you spoke with Lord Raleigh before midnight? And which of you has made a statement that contradicts the scene before us? The room erupted with gasps, protests, denials. Poirot lifted a firm hand, restoring silence with the force of his authority. For one of you, he said coldly, has told a lie so bold, so careless, that it reveals far more than the truth ever could. Lady Vivian clutched the edge of a chair. Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't believe someone here murdered Ambrose? Poirot turned to her with a look both gentle and sharp. Madame, I believe only what the evidence insists upon. And the evidence, though small, whispers loudly tonight. Sir Malcolm stepped forward, irritation flaring. Poirot, the girl is clearly hysterical. Lord Raleigh must have tripped. Why entertain— Why? Poirot interrupted softly. Because the smallest contradictions are often the key to the greatest crimes. And tonight, there is contradiction everywhere. Eleanor Fairfax's voice drifted from across the room. Monsieur Poirot, what do you mean by everywhere? Poirot walked toward her with the surety of a man who already possessed an outline of the truth. He gestured toward the staircase. First, there is the fall, too sudden, too uncontrolled. A man does not stumble in that manner without something provoking it. Second, there is the scent on Lord Raleigh's breath. Third, there is the maid's testimony. And fourth, his gaze swept the guests. There is a statement one of you made earlier this evening, a statement that contradicts what I now know to be true. A murmur again. Poirot let the suspense settle like dust on velvet. But we shall not pursue that yet, he said. For now, the investigation begins. He turned back toward Lord Raleigh's lifeless form. Doctor, we must move the body to a place of examination, and I must have access to the library. Dr. Hawthorne frowned. The library, why? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Because it is the only place in this house where Lord Raleigh could have learned the truth that cost him his life. There was a collective intake of breath. Poirot did not wait for questions. He strode toward the corridor, tapping his fingertips together in thought. Behind him, whispers rose like a storm, fear, confusion, suspicion. But Poirot paid them no mind. In his mind, the pieces had already begun to arrange themselves. The gala had been a stage, the fall a curtain drop. Now the real performance would begin. For someone here had told a lie, and lies, les mensonges, were things Hercule Poirot unraveled with ease. As he reached the door to the library, a sudden crash echoed behind him. A vase shattered. Poirot spun just in time to see a shadow dart across the hallway and vanish behind a column. Someone was watching him. Someone who did not wish him to enter the library. Poirot's eyes narrowed. So, he murmured to himself, the murderer is already at work. He stepped through the library doors. Chapter 2. A Statement That Cannot Be True. The door to the library closed behind Hercule Poirot with a soft but decisive click, sealing him away from the murmurs of alarm rising through the manor. The fragrance of old paper, tobacco, and polished wood enveloped him instantly, a scent Poirot often associated with minds that preferred secrets to conversation. Ravenswick Manor's library was a handsome room, paneled in dark mahogany, illuminated by tall lamps shaded with emerald silk. Every wall was lined with books except the one facing the garden, which bore tall windows veiled with thick velvet curtains. A grand writing desk dominated the center, its surface cluttered with letters, ledgers, and a silver inkstand. Poirot paused, his keen eyes sweeping the room. Everything seemed undisturbed, yet there lingered a subtle tension as though someone had recently rifled through the space in haste. He spotted an overturned paperweight near the edge of the desk, and a sheet of parchment tucked partly beneath the blotter. But he did not approach it yet. The detective always began by orienting himself, by allowing the atmosphere to speak before the evidence did. He turned toward the curtains. They fluttered faintly, though the windows were closed. Poirot drew nearer and brushed the velvet aside. Outside, the gardens were a shroud of mist, yet a fresh footprint, the kind only a hurried guest might leave, was imprinted on the stone ledge beneath the window. He noted its size, direction, and angle. "Interesting," he murmured. Someone was very eager to leave, or to watch. Turning back to the desk, Poirot carefully examined the surface without touching anything. The overturned paperweight, a small bronze statue of Athena, rested near a stack of envelopes. One envelope lay torn, its contents missing. Poirot leaned close, reading the embossed seal. Raleigh Industries and Lunar Holdings. Confidential. He frowned. The combination was unfamiliar. Lord Raleigh's investments were vast but seldom secretive. And Lunar Holdings, who were they? Poirot made a mental note. Only then did he lift the paperweight with the tips of his fingers and gently straighten it. He examined the indentation it had left in the blotter. An indentation that had been tamped over with something. Powder? Dust? No, ash. Poirot brought the paperweight closer. A faint crescent of soot lined its underside. Someone attempted to disguise the disturbance, Poirot murmured. But why? What was here before? He moved to the torn envelope. The rip was not the careful sort made by fingers opening mail. It had been torn in haste, almost violently, and beneath it, slipped halfway under, the blotter, was the parchment he had noticed earlier. Poirot drew it out slowly. It was a letter, handwritten in a bold, sweeping script. The ink had dried recently. The scent still lingered. Poirot read, "Ambrose, our arrangement is no longer tenable. You cannot conceal the truth, and I refuse to shield you further. If you will not confess it tonight, then tomorrow the world shall know." Poirot exhaled through his nose. Eleanor Fairfax, no. The hand is not hers, too forceful, too masculine. He could be anyone. But what arrangement? And what truth had Lord Raleigh feared so greatly that he would be threatened with exposure at his own gala? He folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope provided by the room, sealing it neatly. Poirot never removed evidence without marking its position and recording its orientation, which he now did in a small notebook. Then he turned to the fireplace. The hearth was cold. No fire had burned for hours. Yet scattered across the grate were fragments of burnt paper, too large to be entirely destroyed. Poirot knelt. Using a small pair of tweezers from his pocket, he withdrew the fragments and laid them on the marble floor in careful order. On the largest scrap, the words inheritance and illegitimate remained visible. On another, testament revoked. Poirot's mustache lifted sharply. Ah, a family scandal, and one of significance. He arranged the fragments like a puzzle. More words emerged. Vivian, contingent upon, failure to disclose. These snatches of meaning formed a shape that troubled Poirot. Something to do with Lord Raleigh's will, an undisclosed matter, and perhaps someone's illegitimacy. Possibly even a hidden heir. This will be motive, Poirot murmured. But whose? He had barely risen when the library door burst open. Lady Vivian Raleigh stood trembling in the doorway. Her gown, white silk embroidered with silver threads, now appeared ghostly under the dim lamps. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "They told me you were here. They told me you were already searching." Poirot approached her with gentle composure. "Madame, I offer my condolences. This is a tragedy most grave. But there are matters we must discuss." She pressed a hand over her heart. "I know, but must it be so soon? Ambrose, he is hardly cold." Poirot looked at her carefully. "Death does not wait, madame, nor do those who try to flee it." She flinched. Poirot noted the reaction. He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." She hesitated, then complied, lowering herself slowly onto the velvet seat. Poirot watched her posture, the trembling of her fingers, the way she clutched the folds of her dress. Her grief seemed genuine, yet layered, mixed with fear. "Madam," Poirot began gently, "there is much I must ask, but let us start simply. When did you last see your husband alive?" She swallowed hard. "Just before midnight. He said he needed a moment in the study and would join the guests shortly, but he looked troubled, more than I'd ever seen him." Poirot leaned forward. "Troubled about what?" "I don't know. He would not tell me. He simply said, 'Vivian, the truth has a way of coming out at the most inconvenient times.' And then he left." Poirot tapped a finger against his thumb. "Did he often speak in riddles?" "He was a complicated man." Poirot studied her face. "Madam, Lord Raleigh received a letter tonight, signed by someone using the initial E." Her breath caught sharply. "You recognize this?" Poirot asked. Lady Vivian hesitated. "I may. Ambrose had several correspondences with people he promised he would never speak of publicly." Poirot's eyebrow rose. "And did these correspondences have to do with his will?" She stiffened. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "I found burnt fragments in the fireplace. They refer to secrecy, inheritance, and the possibility of someone being illegitimate." Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled. "Poirot," she whispered, "Ambrose had a son from before our marriage. He never told anyone, not publicly, only I knew." Poirot nodded slowly. "And where is this son now?" I don't know. Ambrose refused to reveal his identity. He said the boy's existence would destroy our social standing. But recently, he feared the truth would emerge. He believed someone was threatening him." Poirot stepped nearer. "Madame, did your husband ever tell you who that someone was? This E?" She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "No, but I suspect it may be someone he once trusted, someone he greatly feared now." Poirot paced slowly, absorbing her words. Then he stopped. "Lady Raleigh," he said, "forgive my abruptness, but I must ask, where were you at the precise moment Lord Raleigh fell?" She looked up, startled. "You surely don't think I think only with facts," Poirot replied calmly. "Please answer." She hesitated. "I was in the conservatory. I stepped away for air. The gala was overwhelming. I was alone." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Alone? No one saw you?" "No." "A pity," Poirot murmured. "For you see, madame, that is a statement that contradicts what I already know." She froze. "What do you mean?" Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have a witness, quiet now, uncertain, who claims to have seen you near the staircase before the fall. Her eyes widened. That is impossible. Poirot studied her. Is it? You say you were alone, unobserved, a convenient alibi, but also a fragile one, and it breaks under pressure. Lady Vivian rose abruptly, voice shaking with indignation. Monsieur Poirot, I loved my husband. Whatever faults our marriage held, I did not kill him. Perhaps not, Poirot said gently. But someone here did, and lies, however small, are the threads by which I unravel truth. Before she could respond, the door swung open again, this time with force. Sir Malcolm Denwood stormed into the room, face red with fury. Poirot, he bellowed. What is the meaning of this? Questioning Lady Raleigh as though she were a common criminal? Poirot eyed Sir Malcolm evenly. I question everyone, Sir Malcolm, even you. Sir Malcolm's jaw tightened. Well, question me then. I have nothing to hide. Poirot folded his hands. Très bien. Then let us begin. Where were you before the fall? By the fireplace in the great hall, Sir Malcolm said confidently. Half the guests saw me. A strong alibi, Poirot noted. Strong indeed. Yet you reacted rather swiftly when Lord Raleigh fell. You reached him first. Sir Malcolm scowled. I was close by, that is all. And the argument? Poirot asked. What argument? The maid claims Lord Raleigh was arguing with a man just before he fell. Sir Malcolm snorted. Ridiculous. I heard no such thing. Poirot tilted his head. Did you? Or do you merely wish you hadn't? Sir Malcolm stepped forward aggressively. Poirot, I warn you. The detective raised a hand calmly. There is no need to threaten. Your anger tells me more than any answer. Sir Malcolm's eyes flashed, but he said nothing further. Poirot turned away from him. You may both leave now, but remain available. The truth, it is close. Lady Vivian fled the room in near tears. Sir Malcolm lingered glowering before following her. When the door shut once more, silence fell. Poirot turned back to the desk. His eyes narrowed. Something spoken tonight did not align. It nagged at him like an unsolved equation. A statement offered by one of the guests that contradicted the physical evidence he had seen with his own eyes. He replayed the evening in his mind. The toasts, the glances, the trembling hands, the quiet lies disguised as politeness. Then it struck him. One sentence, one careless remark made by a person who should never have said it. A statement that proved they had been somewhere they claimed they had not. Poirot's breath caught. Mon Dieu, he whispered. It was there all along. He moved swiftly to the balcony doors. They were ajar by the tiniest fraction, a millimeter, no more. Enough to let in the cold air, enough to allow a person to watch unseen. He knelt and inspected the floor. A single dark fiber clung to the carpet. Poirot plucked it with tweezers, a thread of midnight blue wool. Poirot rose with certainty. He knew who had lied, but he did not yet know why, and until he had motive, the killer would remain confident. Too confident. A foolish thing, Poirot murmured, for the killer forgets. I always find the truth. As he left the library, the corridor outside was dark, too dark. Poirot sensed movement, a whisper of footsteps, a shift of weight behind a column. Someone was still watching him, still listening. The murderer was not finished yet. Chapter 3. The guests of the unfinished gala. The great hall had transformed from a glittering celebration into a tableau of dread. Servants hovered at the edges of the room like pale ghosts, uncertain whether to resume their duties or flee. The guests, once radiant with laughter and wine, now clustered in anxious knots along the walls, whispering fragments of fear between trembling breaths. All music had ceased. The chandeliers seemed too bright. The silence between each muffled sob grew long enough to strain the nerves of every soul present. Hercule Poirot entered the hall with the quiet authority of a man who had already begun assembling the truth. His eyes traveled from face to face, noting which ones had paled, which ones avoided his gaze, and which ones watched him too intently. He clasped his gloved hands behind his back and cleared his throat. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Your cooperation now is essential. I must speak to each of you, one by one." A ripple of unease passed through the guests, but none dared protest. The air felt brittle, as if the wrong word might shatter it entirely. Poirot gestured to the nearest cluster, Lord Raleigh's closest acquaintances. Eleanor Fairfax stepped forward first. Tall, poised, sculpted by ambition and cool calculation, she held her chin high, though the faint tremble at her jaw betrayed her distress. Her gown of deep sapphire shimmered beneath the chandeliers, framing her like a figure carved from ice. She inclined her head toward Poirot. "If you need my statement, monsieur, I am prepared." Poirot nodded once. "Then we begin." They moved to a quieter corner away from the murmuring guests. Eleanor's eyes flicked once toward the staircase, toward the spot where Lord Raleigh had fallen, before fixing on Poirot with chilled composure. "Tell me, mademoiselle," Poirot began, "your relationship with Lord Raleigh. How would you describe it?" Eleanor inhaled, her gloves tightening around her clutch. "We were close. Not romantically, of course. He was a mentor, a patron of my charitable foundation." Poirot's eyebrow arched. "And recently? Was there tension?" Her lips twitched. "Tension? With Ambrose there was always tension. He thrived on it, but tonight—" Her voice faltered. "Tonight he seemed almost frightened." Poirot leaned forward. "You noticed his fear?" "Yes. I approached him at 11 to discuss funding for a project. He brushed me aside quite rudely and said the matter of charity was of no importance tonight." Poirot nodded slowly. "And where were you at the time of the fall?" "In the gallery overlooking the hall," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I wanted a quieter vantage point. Many saw me go, up, a strong alibi." "Too strong?" Poirot tucked the thought away. "Merci, mademoiselle." Eleanor bowed her head respectfully and stepped aside. Her departure was quickly replaced by the arrival of the next guest, one whose presence seemed to sour the air. Gregor Hale, Lord Raleigh's business partner. Thick-set, bristling with impatience and reeled from the fumes of expensive whiskey, Hale towered over Poirot with the posture of a man accustomed to dominating boardrooms and suppressing inconvenient truths. "Let's get this over with," Hale growled. "I have no patience for theatrics." Poirot smiled mildly. "And yet, monsieur, this evening has been full of theatrics, ones that cost a life." Hale's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. "Your dealings with Lord Raleigh," Poirot continued, "were they agreeable?" Hale barked a cynical laugh. "Agreeable? Hardly. Ambrose was reckless, always meddling where he shouldn't, always hiding things. Secrets upon secrets." His eyes glittered. "But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're angling for." Poirot pressed gently. "Where were you when Lord Raleigh fell?" Hale leaned back. "At the bar. Ask the bartender. I was nowhere near the damned staircase." Poirot observed him with interest. "And you did not argue with Lord Raleigh earlier tonight?" Hale's nostrils flared. "If I had, everyone would have heard it. The man drove me mad. But tonight? No. We kept our distance." Poirot dismissed him with a curt nod. Hale lumbered away, muttering curses under his breath. Next came a different kind of presence entirely. Clara Whitcomb, a shy painting student whose inclusion at such a prestigious gala was itself a curiosity. She looked scarcely 20 and wilted under Poirot's attention like a frost-touched flower. Her pale hair fell in soft waves over her face as she stammered out a greeting. Monsieur Poirot, I hardly knew Lord Raleigh. I shouldn't even be here." Poirot softened his tone. "Then why are you here, mademoiselle?" Clara twisted her fingers nervously. "Lady Vivian invited me. She liked my portraits. Said she wanted to encourage young artists." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "And did you see anything unusual tonight?" Clara bit her lip. "I saw people arguing. Not clearly, but I heard raised voices from the library earlier. A man and a woman." Poirot leaned closer. "Did you recognize them?" She shook her head, eyes wide with fear. "No, but the woman sounded angry, very angry." Poirot filed this away. "And where were you during the fall?" "In the portrait gallery, alone." Her eyes dropped. "I know how that sounds." "Everything sounds until it is verified," Poirot replied kindly. "Merci, mademoiselle." Clara hurried away, nearly stumbling in her haste. 3 suspects, 3 alibis, though none airtight, and 1 overheard argument. Poirot's gaze drifted next toward the staircase where Inspector Graves of the local constabulary had just arrived. A tall man with a pencil-thin mustache and a coat that seemed to weigh more than he did. Graves scanned the hall with the grave importance of a man already certain he would mishandle the case. "Poirot," Graves said, approaching with stiff politeness. "A tragedy, very unfortunate, but likely nothing more than a fall." Poirot smiled tightly. "Ah, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, always so efficient and always so wrong." Graves bristled. "You think it murder, then?" "I know it," Poirot said softly. "And I also know the killer stands among us still." Graves paled, then began barking orders to ensure no guest attempted to leave. Poirot watched him go, then turned his attention to the last remaining witness in the hall, the maid who had earlier claimed to see a shove. Marion, her name was, barely 20, trembling, clutching her apron like a lifeline. Poirot approached carefully. "Mademoiselle Marion, you were brave earlier, but now I must ask you again, calmly, clearly. What did you see?" Marion swallowed. "I was at the top of the stairs. I had gone to deliver a note to Lord Raleigh." Her voice quavered. "He was arguing with someone, a man. I didn't see his face, only his sleeve. Dark blue, very dark. And then he fell." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The thread he found in the library, midnight blue wool. The same." "Did you hear the man speak?" he asked. "No, only Lord Raleigh. He said, 'You cannot deny it any longer.' Then the shove." Poirot nodded slowly. "You have helped greatly, mademoiselle. Go rest now." She hurried off, grateful to escape scrutiny. Poirot turned back to the hall. 10 suspects remained, 10 stories, 10 fears, but only one had worn a coat of dark blue, and only one had made the careless mistake, the contradiction, that gave them away. Poirot's gaze rose to the balcony where a lone figure stood watching him intently. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. "It is time," he whispered. "Time to speak with you next." Chapter 4. Poirot Notes the Unsaid. A soft rain began to patter against the tall windows of Ravenswick Manor as dawn fully claimed the sky, the clouds hanging low like a shroud over the grounds. Poirot stood near the hearth of the drawing room, hands clasped behind his back, eyes half closed in contemplation. The fire sputtered faintly, casting bronze flashes across his polished shoes. It was a room meant for quiet elegance, embroidered chairs, somber portraits, and the faint scent of lavender polish. But now it held the uneasy residue of whispered accusations. The manor's occupants moved through the halls like restless phantoms, their steps brisk, their gazes evasive. Poirot could feel the tension accumulating in the air like static. He had spent the morning interviewing each guest, but he found himself less interested in the words they offered and more in the silences between them. "It is there," he told himself with gentle certainty, "that the truth hides. One must listen with the ears, yes, but also with the mind, and perhaps more importantly with the little gray cells that examine not only what is spoken but what a person chooses not to say." Lady Celestine Wren was the first to enter the drawing-room for a second meeting. Her gown, a pale rose silk, shimmered even in the muted light as though it had gathered the dawn itself. But her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, her usual confidence softened by apprehension. She carried herself like someone balancing an invisible weight, delicate yet strained. Poirot motioned for her to sit, observing the faint tremble in her gloved hands as she lowered herself onto the sofa. "You are troubled, madame," he said gently. She hesitated, folding her hands tightly in her lap. Anyone would be, Monsieur Poirot, after such a tragedy. "Mais oui, yet among the many who grieve, yours appears particular." Lady Celestine looked away, gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. "Lord Ambrose was a patron," she said with deliberate calm. "A benefactor to my art foundation. His death is a loss to many." Poirot tilted his head. "You speak of his position, his influence, yet you avoid speaking of the man." The faintest flinch betrayed her, a small movement, almost imperceptible. But Poirot's eyes caught it instantly. She offered him a brittle smile, one that did not quite reach her eyes. "I suppose I did not know him personally as well as some others." "But you knew him well enough," Poirot replied softly. "Well enough that last night when his body was discovered. You did not approach it." Her breath caught, a small, sharp sound she quickly stifled. Poirot said nothing more. Silence pressed itself between them until Lady Celestine rose abruptly, her composure cracking at the edges. "I cannot do this just now," she murmured. "Please excuse me." Poirot watched her retreating form, noting the stiffness in her shoulders, the quickened pace. She was hiding something. Of that he was certain. But whether it was guilt, fear, or some deeper secret remained a matter for the little gray cells to unravel. Next entered Mr. Theodore Hemsley, his spectacles fogged slightly from the damp air outside. He was a man of rigid posture and meticulous habits, yet his fingers twitched as though restless. He carried a small notebook pressed to his chest, and his eyes darted around the drawing room as if cataloging every detail. Poirot gestured for him to sit. Hemsley perched on the edge of a chair like a sparrow prepared to flee at the slightest startle. "You were quite insistent, monsieur, that you heard the scream before midnight," Poirot began. Yes, I'm certain of it," Hemsley replied, nodding rapidly. "And yet," Poirot continued, "every clock in this house reads otherwise. They place the scream at 12 past midnight. A discrepancy most curious." Hemsley swallowed hard. "Clocks can be wrong, can they not?" Poirot's brow lifted. "Perhaps one clock may falter, but all of them? That is a little coincidence too large even for Hercule Poirot." Hemsley's gaze flickered toward the door as though wishing to bolt. He tugged the edges of his sleeves anxiously. I cannot explain it." "Then you cannot explain why you contradicted every other ear in the manner?" "I told the truth," he burst out. "Why will no one believe me?" Poirot studied him carefully. The panic was real, but panic did not exclude guilt. When Hemsley was finally dismissed, he departed in such haste that he nearly collided with Inspector Graves in the doorway. Graves stepped inside, removing his hat and brushing off droplets of rain. "He looks worse each hour," the inspector remarked dryly. "Oui," Poirot murmured. "He is very afraid. Guilty men often are. Non, mon ami. Innocent men can be equally afraid, especially when they know something that others do not wish to be known." Graves snorted. You and your theories. I and my facts, Poirot corrected gently. It is always the unsaid that speaks most loudly. The inspector frowned as he approached the window, watching the rain blur the garden paths. Well, say what you will, but I'm more concerned with this business about the broken railing. If Raleigh fell, he might have grabbed at it. But your theory suggests he did not fall accidentally. Poirot joined him by the window. Because he did not. You're certain of that? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Quite, and the murderer knows that I know. Graves looked startled. You think you're being watched? I am sure of it. Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. Someone has been observing each interview. Someone who hopes to understand how close I am to the truth, and whether they must take further action. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating a shadowy figure moving across the far end of the garden. Poirot's posture stiffened. But before Graves could react, the figure vanished behind the hedges. The remainder of the morning passed with interviews that offered more shadows than substance. Miss Arden Blackwood, the young novelist, arrived with a distracted air, her ink-stained fingers twisting a loose strand of hair. She answered questions with thoughtful pauses, but Poirot noted she never once mentioned where she had been between the scream and the discovery of the body. The omission was deliberate, too deliberate. Then there was Captain Lionel Ward, tall and stoic, whose military discipline masked a simmering unease. He spoke plainly, but his jaw tightened whenever Lord Ambrose's name was mentioned, as though recalling a wound, emotional or otherwise. A man of pride wounded is a man of unpredictable impulses. Through each interview, Poirot observed the same thing, a strange reluctance, a collective hush surrounding the final hour of Ambrose Raleigh's life. It was not merely fear, it was choreography. Each guest in their own way had chosen their words carefully, leaving behind a trail of silences more telling than confessions. By afternoon, Poirot retreated to the small study overlooking the east garden. He placed his notebook on the desk, tapping its cover lightly as he assembled the morning's revelations. The contradictory statement, the one impossibility in every guest's account, still hung before him like an unfinished puzzle piece. Someone had lied, magnificently, and that lie was beginning to unravel. The door creaked open. A footman entered hesitantly. Monsieur Poirot, a message has arrived for you. It was left anonymously. Poirot unfolded the paper, his heart giving a small cold flutter. 4 words were scrawled in hurried ink. Stop asking about midnight. Poirot stared at the message for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Slow, deliberate, triumphant. Chapter 5. The Locked Morning. The rain had not stopped by morning. Instead, it intensified, drumming relentlessly against Ravenswick Manor as though demanding to be let inside. A gray pall hung over the house, dimming every corridor and muting every color. Servants whispered superstitiously that the storm was an omen, but Poirot thought otherwise. Storms merely revealed cracks in structures, in routines, and most importantly, in lies. Inspector Graves met him at the bottom of the grand staircase, his coat damp and his expression sour. We've got a new problem, he muttered, motioning for Poirot to follow. A door has been found locked from the inside. And not just any door, the late Lord Ambrose's study. Poirot's eyebrows rose elegantly. Locked this morning, you say? Graves nodded grimly. It was open last night when the body was moved, but now it's bolted from within. No one admits to touching it. Poirot followed him through the west corridor, the plush carpets muffling their steps. The study door, a heavy oak structure carved with curling ivy patterns, stood ominously shut. A single constable stood guard, his hand nervously tapping the hilt of his truncheon. Have you attempted to force it? Poirot asked. Not yet, Graves replied. Didn't want to disturb potential evidence before you had a look. Poirot knelt, examining the lock with delicate precision. There is no debris, no splintering. The bolt is slid cleanly into place. Someone closed this door from the inside. But there's no one in there, Graves insisted. We checked the windows from outside, sealed tight. No footprints anywhere near them. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. Then either the person who locked it escaped in a manner most ingenious, or they were never inside to begin with. With a nod from the inspector, the constable drove his shoulder into the door. It gave way with a heavy crack, swinging inward to reveal the shadowed study. Dust motes drifted lazily in the dim morning light that seeped through the curtained windows. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes, maps, and old nautical instruments. Ambrose's strange passions. Nothing seemed disturbed, no displaced chair, no overturned object, no sign of struggle. Yet Poirot's eyes sharpened. Something was wrong, something subtle. The carpet, he murmured, stepping further inside. Graves blinked. The carpet. Poirot gestured. Look, the prints of the movers from last night. Here, here, and here. He pointed to faint indentations where heavy boots had pressed. But near the desk, footprints that do not belong to the movers. Smaller, lighter. Someone was here after the body was removed. Graves swore under his breath. A trespasser. A visitor, Poirot corrected softly. One returning to find something. He approached the writing desk, Ambrose's sanctuary of ink and parchment. The drawers were closed, but Poirot sensed their secrets as surely as if they whispered to him. With a gentle tug, he slid open the top drawer. Inside lay neatly stacked papers, except for one spot of disrupted dust, a perfect rectangle where a single sheet should have been. Something is missing, Poirot murmured. Graves leaned in. A document. Perhaps something else. Whatever it was, its absence is intentional. Poirot opened the middle drawer. Empty, but curiously so. Too well arranged, too deliberate. And then, as he opened the lowest drawer, a faint smell drifted upward. He inhaled. Pine oil. Freshly applied. Recently cleaned. He closed the drawer with slow precision. Someone cleaned only this drawer. Why? Graves rubbed his temples. Poirot, I swear every time I think we're close, this case twists again. Poirot smiled gently. That is because you look for events. I look for intentions. Before Graves could argue, a sudden knock sounded from the hallway. Miss Arden Blackwood appeared at the threshold, rain-damp hair clinging in ink-dark strands around her face. I'm sorry to intrude, she said softly, but the servants are talking. They said you found something? Graves stiffened. This is an active investigation. Poirot raised a calming hand. Mademoiselle Blackwood, perhaps you can assist us. Tell me, did Lord Ambrose keep a journal? Her eyes widened, a reaction too swift to be feigned. Yes, I believe he did. A private one. He never let anyone see it. And where was it kept? In the bottom drawer, she replied immediately. Then her hand flew to her mouth. Wait, don't tell me it's missing. Poirot's silence was answer enough. Miss Blackwood paled, grasping the doorframe for support. Monsieur Poirot, if someone has taken that journal, then they hold every secret Ambrose ever recorded. Her voice trembled. Every conflict, every debt, every private threat he received. Graves muttered a curse. So anyone in this house might now have motive. Poirot stepped closer to Miss Blackwood, studying the fear behind her eyes. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you know of these secrets? She hesitated too long before answering. No, of course not. Poirot's gaze softened but remained unyielding. You are a writer. You observe people deeply. I find it difficult to believe you noticed nothing unusual about Lord Ambrose. Miss Blackwood swallowed. He was anxious, increasingly so these last 2 weeks. I saw him pacing the gardens at dawn, speaking to someone in hushed tones, but I never heard what was said. With whom did he speak? I don't know. It was too far to see, but I assumed it was one of the guests. Poirot nodded slowly. Your assistance is most valuable. As she left, Poirot turned back to Graves. The locked door was not meant to hide a person, Poirot said quietly. It was meant to hide a theft. And whoever stole that journal locked the door behind them to give the illusion that nothing had been touched. Poirot tapped his temple gently. Exactement. A locked room illusion. A trick of misdirection. He surveyed the study once more. The dust, the faint footprints, the wiped drawer. Someone had moved with purpose, yet with haste. Someone who feared what Poirot might discover if he entered too soon. Then his gaze drifted to the windows, the rain streaks. No disturbance in the garden soil, no escape route through the glass. The thief was still inside the manor. Poirot leaned forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper. Inspector, someone fears that the truth about midnight is written in that journal, and they will not hesitate to silence anyone who searches for it. Graves felt a chill crawl up his spine. Poirot, you think you're next? Poirot adjusted his tie calmly. But of course. He turned toward the door with quiet resolve. And that, mon ami, is why we must act before nightfall. Chapter 6. An alibi in smoke. The storm weakened by afternoon, though the sky remained a heavy slate gray, as though the sun itself hesitated to look upon Ravenswick Manor. Poirot, however, walked the corridors with renewed intensity. A stolen journal, a contradictory statement about midnight, and a locked study. These were no longer fragments. They were lines converging toward a single truth. Yet the truth remained buried beneath layers of fear and deception. He found Captain Lionel Ward on the east veranda, the only place in the manor where smoking was permitted. The captain stood rigidly against the balustrade, cigarette pinched between 2 fingers, the thin plume of smoke curling upward like a silver ribbon. His uniform jacket hung neatly over one arm, and his expression was one of practiced composure. But Poirot knew better. Men who had seen battle often hid their unrest behind their posture. Captain Ward, Poirot greeted, stepping out beneath the overhang. May I join you? Ward gave a polite nod. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, I imagine you're here to interrogate me again. Interrogate? No. I simply wish to clarify the matter of your whereabouts at midnight. Ward exhaled a long trail of smoke. I told you already I was in the billiard room. Alone. Yes. Poirot smiled gently. You do not make it easy for yourself, mon capitaine. An alibi that relies on solitude is fragile. Ward flicked ash over the railing. So be it. I don't intend to fabricate witnesses. Très honorable, Poirot said. But perhaps you will indulge me. Why the billiard room? Why alone? Why at that particular hour? Ward stiffened. Insomnia. I've had it since the war. I walk, I pace, sometimes I play. Poirot studied him. The explanation was plausible, yet something about the timing puzzled him. You heard nothing? No scream? No commotion? Ward shook his head. Nothing until the maid's cry afterward. And the clocks? Poirot pressed. Do you recall the time? I checked my pocket watch when I reached the billiard room. 5 minutes to midnight. Ah, Poirot murmured. So you are quite certain of your timekeeping. Ward narrowed his eyes. Is that a problem? Poirot tilted his head. Only because another guest, Monsieur Hemsley, insists he heard the scream before midnight. An impossibility according to every clock in this house. Yet your presence in the billiard room at that exact moment is, how shall we say, convenient. Ward bristled. Are you accusing me? I accuse no one, Poirot answered lightly. But I must observe what aligns. And your timing aligns very neatly indeed. Ward crushed the cigarette beneath his heel. If you think I harmed Ambrose, you're sorely mistaken. The man and I had our disagreements, but I never wished him dead. Disagreements? Poirot repeated softly. You did not mention those previously. Ward hesitated. Because they're irrelevant. Non, non, Poirot said, wagging a finger. When a man dies, even the smallest conflict becomes most interesting. Ward exhaled sharply. Fine. Ambrose cut funding to a veterans project I was advocating for. We argued. He said he had more pressing concerns, whatever that meant. And did this argument end well? No. But I'm not the only one he crossed recently. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah? Then perhaps you will tell me who else he angered? Ward hesitated once more, then said quietly, Lady Celestine. He threatened to withdraw his support from her foundation. I overheard them arguing 2 days ago. Poirot absorbed this in thoughtful silence. Another piece, another motive. He thanked Ward and made his way back inside, the manor's corridors echoing faintly beneath his steps. As he reached the gallery, he found Lady Celestine herself standing before a large portrait of Ambrose, painted in earlier years when his expression held a calculating pride. Strange, she murmured, not noticing Poirot at first. He looks so alive here, so certain of himself. Poirot approached quietly. A portrait captures the man he wished to be, not always the man he became. She turned, startled but visibly exhausted. Monsieur Poirot, I suppose you wish to question me again. With your permission, madam, she folded her hands. Very well. Captain Ward tells me that Lord Ambrose intended to withdraw his support from your foundation. Is this true? Her lips tightened. Ambrose did threaten it, but he changed his mind. When? Poirot asked softly. Last week, she whispered. He approached me privately. He apologized for his temper. He said he feared something terrible was coming. Poirot froze. Terrible? Did he elaborate? No, only that he wanted to ensure my financial security in the event that anything happened to him. Poirot leaned closer. Did he say he was in danger? She hesitated. Yes, not directly, but he was nervous, restless. I thought it was simply stress. Poirot felt a chill, though not from the drafty corridor. Ambrose Raleigh had known something, and someone had wanted that knowledge erased, hence the stolen journal. As Lady Celestine drifted away, Poirot's attention caught on a faint scent in the gallery air. Smoke, but not from cigarettes, from something older, harsher, a match recently struck. He followed the smell past the portraits until he reached a small alcove. There, behind a curtain, was a metal waste bin. Poirot knelt. Inside lay charred remains of paper. Not fully burned, someone had been interrupted. He lifted a partially intact scrap with delicacy. Ink strokes remained. A date, a name, and a half-scorched sentence. Midnight meeting. Cannot continue. Poirot's pulse quickened. Someone had attempted to burn a page from Ambrose Raleigh's journal today. Footsteps sounded behind him. Poirot stood slowly, turning to see Miss Arden Blackwood emerging from the shadows, her expression unreadable. Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly, you look troubled. Poirot held up the charred scrap. Someone tried to destroy this, someone who fears midnight. Her eyes flickered, just for an instant. Midnight again. Poirot stepped closer. You know more than you have said, mademoiselle. Her breath caught. I've told you everything I can. can," Poirot repeated. "Not will." Before she could answer, Ward's urgent voice echoed down the corridor. "Poirot, Inspector Graves requests your presence immediately. There's been another incident." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Miss Blackwood as she stepped backward. Her eyes did not look fearful, they looked haunted. Poirot straightened his tie, his expression firm. "Then, mon ami," he murmured, "the little gray cells must hurry. For the smoke of lies grows thicker, and where there is smoke there is always fire." He turned sharply toward the stairs, already sensing that the night ahead would offer no rest. Chapter 7. The Portrait That Moved. The manor had begun to acquire a strange stillness, a sensation of air held in suspension, as though the very walls were waiting. The rain had finally broken, leaving the ground soaked and glistening beneath the muted afternoon light. Yet despite the clearing skies, a peculiar heaviness lingered, a heaviness Poirot felt in every room he entered. Ravenswick Manor no longer seemed merely a grand estate. It felt like a closed vessel, airtight and brimming with secrets. Inspector Graves intercepted him at the base of the main staircase, his expression grim. "This way," he muttered. "Quickly." Poirot followed him through the north corridor where the portraits of Raleigh ancestors hung in stern rows. Their watchful eyes, rendered in oils darkened by time, seemed almost accusatory. Graves halted before a door leading to a small antechamber. He pushed it open. Inside, a maid sat trembling on a wooden chair, her apron crumpled in her fists. "This is Clara," Graves said. "She's the one who reported the incident." The girl swallowed hard, her eyes flicking fearfully between the two men. I swear, sir, I'm not mad." Poirot crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "Tell me, mademoiselle, what did you see?" Her breath hitched. The portrait of Lord Ambrose in the long gallery, it moved." Graves scoffed. "It shifted on its hook. Old mansions do that." "No," Clara cried. "It moved forward, straight out, as if someone was behind it." A silence fell. Poirot straightened slowly. "Ah, now that, Inspector, is not the settling of old plaster." Within minutes they reached the long gallery, an imposing stretch of hallway lined with lavish paintings. The portrait of Ambrose Raleigh dominated the far end, his dark velvet coat and severe expression illuminated by a high, arched window. It stood slightly askew, not crooked, tilted outward away from the wall. Poirot approached, every step measured. "Do not touch it," he warned softly. The closer he drew, the clearer the disturbance became. At the top edge of the frame, a thin trail of plaster dust lay scattered on the polished floorboards. Beneath the lower corner, the wall bore faint marks, scratches consistent with a painting being lifted, shifted, or opened. "Inspector," Poirot murmured, "help me remove it very carefully." Together they lifted the portrait from the wall. Behind it, instead of bare plaster, a narrow recess yawned like a dark mouth. A concealed cavity. Graves whistled. "A hidden compartment." Poirot nodded. "And one recently disturbed." Inside the recess lay a small metal latch and a shallow groove where an object, a book-shaped object, had once rested. But it was empty now. Poirot exhaled slowly. This was where Ambrose kept his journal. Graves' mouth tightened. "So someone came back today to fetch what they missed." "Non," Poirot corrected quietly. "Someone came back because they feared I would find it next. They sought to move or destroy what remained." As Poirot studied the recess, something caught his eye, a shred of dark wool clinging to the inner hinge. He plucked it delicately. Black wool, from a coat, and very fine quality, someone wealthy. "Half the guests fit that description," Graves muttered. Poirot stepped back, gazing at the empty recess with narrowed eyes. This hidden compartment tells us two things. First, that Ambrose Raleigh hid something of great importance, and second, that someone else knew about this hiding place, either through discovery or because Ambrose told them. Graves frowned. You think he confided in someone? Oui. And that someone now works very hard to erase every trace of what he feared. Before the inspector could respond, rapid footsteps approached. Mr. Hemsley appeared, breathing hard, his spectacles askew. Monsieur Poirot, I must speak with you, in private. Poirot exchanged a glance with Graves. Very well. Come. They stepped into a nearby sitting room. Hemsley wrung his hands, pacing in short, rapid bursts. I saw something, he whispered. Something I didn't understand until now. Poirot's voice was soft. Take your time, monsieur. Last night, before the scream, I passed the gallery, and I saw Lord Ambrose. He was standing in front of that very portrait, but he wasn't looking at it. He was pressing something on the frame. Poirot stilled. Pressing? Hemsley nodded vigorously. A button, perhaps. I didn't see clearly, but the portrait shifted. He was hiding something. I should have said so earlier, but you feared sounding foolish, Poirot finished. Hemsley's silence confirmed it. And, Poirot continued softly, the time. What was the time when you saw him? Hemsley hesitated, his greatest torment. A few minutes before midnight. The contradiction, again. Poirot studied him. This man was no liar by nature. Anxious, yes. Prone to confusion, yes, but lying? Poirot doubted it. You have done well to tell me now, Poirot said gently. You may go. When Hemsley hurried out, Graves folded his arms. Poirot, if Ambrose was alive before midnight, then the scream— Yes, Poirot murmured. The scream cannot have been at 12 past midnight, and someone adjusted the clocks to ensure it appeared so. Graves stiffened. To create a false timeline. Exactement. Poirot walked slowly down the gallery, deep in thought. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. Subtle but wrong. He turned to the portrait again. Inspector, bring the lantern. Graves fetched it from a side table. Poirot held the warm light close to the recess, examining its edges. There, etched into the wood, almost invisible, a tiny smear of soot from burned paper. Someone, Poirot murmured, retrieved the remaining journal pages, only to burn them somewhere else in the manor. And all this, Graves said, to hide whatever Ambrose wrote about midnight. Poirot nodded gravely. A truth someone is willing to kill for. As they replaced the portrait, a cold draft swept through the gallery, extinguishing half the lantern's flame. Poirot looked toward the far end of the hall. A figure had been standing there moments before. He was certain of it, a silhouette among shadows, watching, listening, waiting. But now the hall was empty. Poirot's voice was barely a whisper. The murderer is growing desperate. He straightened, smoothing his jacket, eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. And when a murderer grows desperate, they make mistakes. He turned down the corridor, the echo of his steps steady and unhurried, though he already knew. Nightfall would bring the most dangerous chapter yet. Chapter 8. A Truth in Ashes. The hearth in the west. Drawing room crackled gently, though no one could remember lighting it. Poirot stood before the fire, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette trimmed in wavering gold. Around him the room held the stale perfume of yesterday's gathering, champagne, wilting lilies, and the faintest trace of panic. The flames spat, and with each spark Poirot's eyes flickered as if measuring every ember for a secret it had yet to yield. Hastings watched him from a nearby chair, puzzled by Poirot's sudden fascination with the ashes. Poirot bent carefully, retrieving a small iron poker. With delicate movements, he sifted through the gray pile, nudging aside the charred remnants of paper. Some pieces were intact enough to hint at their nature. Thicker stock, edges once smooth. "Mon ami, observe," Poirot murmured. "These ashes, they have been burned recently. Yet the fire looks as though it has been lit for hours." Hastings blinked. "You think someone rekindled it?" Poirot shook his head. "No. Someone has burned something after the main logs had died. Someone wanted a particular sheet of paper reduced to nothing. But they misjudged the draft. Small fragments survived." Hastings leaned in as Poirot lifted a curled scrap between tweezers. Its ink was smeared, but the faint outline of a crest remained. The Raleigh family crest. "A letter, perhaps," Hastings offered. "A letter," Poirot repeated softly. "Or instructions." He rose, smoothing his jacket. His gaze drifted to the windows overlooking the gardens where dawn's dull light barely managed to cut through the early fog. "We must discover who burned this and what the original message contained." A quiet knock disturbed the still room. Lady Adelaide Raleigh entered draped in a deep burgundy shawl. She looked exhausted but somehow sharper than before, as though a night's anguish had honed rather than softened her resolve. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, clasping her hands, "my late husband's valet insists on speaking with you. He claims it is urgent." Poirot bowed his head slightly and motioned toward the hall. "Let us go at once, Lady Adelaide. Urgency is a word with weight, and this morning we cannot afford to ignore it." In the corridor, the valet, Mr. Hargrove, stood rigidly, his pale eyes darting toward every creak of the manor. "Sir, madam, I fear I may have been mistaken last night," he stammered. Poirot regarded him keenly. "Mistaken? About what, monsieur?" Hargrove's throat bobbed. "About where I was when Lord Ambrose fell. I stated that I was preparing the guest rooms, but—" He paused, trembling. "I had stepped into Lord Ambrose's study. There was a letter on his desk, a letter addressed to me." Poirot raised a brow. "A letter from Lord Ambrose? Why would he write to you, his valet?" Hargrove hesitated, but the words escaped him in a rush. He had discovered something involving the estate accounts. He wrote that he wished to see me that night, privately. The air thickened. Lady Adelaide's face drained of color. "Are you implying," she whispered, "that Ambrose suspected you of impropriety?" The valet shrank as if struck. I do not know, but when I returned to the study after the scream, the letter was gone. And now you say papers were burned." His voice cracked. "I fear the truth has been destroyed." Poirot motioned gently for calm. "Perhaps not destroyed entirely." His gaze drifted back toward the drawing room. The fire's strange timing, the surviving fragments. It was beginning to form a pattern in his mind. "Mr. Hargrove, did anyone else have knowledge of this letter?" The valet shook his head vehemently. "No, sir. Only Lord Ambrose and myself." When Hargrove departed, wringing his hands, Lady Adelaide remained behind. Her expression had hardened into something brittle. "Monsieur Poirot," she said in a low voice, "you are far too clever not to suspect the implications. My husband believed someone close to him was stealing. You have now heard two possible culprits. My cousin Blake with the estate affairs, and now my own servant." Poirot nodded with grave acknowledgement. "Yes, milady, but suspicion and truth are not the same. One cannot assume guilt simply because the pieces appear to fit. We must study each piece, see how it relates to the whole." Adelaide's eyes flicked toward the staircase as if expecting someone. "There is something else," she murmured. "Last night, shortly before the announcement of Ambrose's collapse, I saw a figure near the study, tall, wearing a dark coat. I assumed it was Blake, but he denied being there. Poirot responded gently. And you did not challenge him further? A flash of defensiveness crossed her features. I was in shock, and Blake has always had a talent for denying inconvenient truths. Poirot's mind churned. A figure in a coat, a missing letter, burned evidence, a fire lit just enough to destroy targeted material. Someone was moving with precision, and that precision told him something. The culprit was no impulsive murderer. This was someone who feared exposure, someone who understood the importance of one particular document. He walked toward the study with Hastings trailing behind. The corridor grew colder the closer they came, as though the manor itself recoiled from the secrets embedded in that room. When Poirot opened the door, the scent of old leather and stale tobacco released like a sigh. Everything appeared meticulously arranged, save for one detail: a thin line of torn paper trapped beneath the leg of the desk. Poirot knelt, sliding the scrap free. Hastings exhaled sharply. That looks like the same paper as the burned pieces. Poirot nodded, studying it with intense focus. On the scrap were two distinct strokes of ink, barely a fragment of a larger sentence. But Poirot murmured, "Even the smallest remnant can whisper a truth." He searched the desk drawers next. Most held routine items, ledgers, correspondence, a half-burnt candle stump, but in the lowest drawer, wrapped in cloth, Poirot found something unexpected: a second key to the estate's financial safe. Hastings frowned. "I thought Blake kept the only key." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oui, he did say so with great emphasis, and yet—" His fingers brushed the cold metal. Why would Lord Ambrose conceal a duplicate unless he no longer trusted the man who claimed control of his accounts? The room seemed to answer with silence. Poirot wrapped the key in his handkerchief. "This changes much, Hastings. Blake may have lied, but lies can protect the innocent as well as the guilty." Hastings blinked. "Why would an innocent man lie?" Poirot tilted his head. "Because sometimes, mon ami, the truth is far more dangerous." As they exited the study, Poirot paused at the threshold. His expression sharpened. He had noticed something, a faint smudge on the doorframe. He reached out and touched it lightly. Ash. Not soot from the fireplace, but the same pale ash from the west drawing room. Someone had handled the burning papers and then come here. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "Hastings, the one who burned the letter, visited this room afterward. And if that is so, then the culprit sought to ensure the original letter left no trace. Yet they did not know of the hidden scrap beneath the desk." Hastings inhaled. "So the murderer thought they had covered everything." Poirot's eyes hardened. They believed so, but they underestimated Hercule Poirot. He stepped back, surveying the corridor stretching before them, dim in the morning gloom. Three shadows loomed in Poirot's thoughts: Blake, Lady Adelaide, Hargrove, and each now held a stronger motive than the night before. Someone among them had gambled everything on destroying one truth, but the ashes still whispered, and Poirot was ready to listen. Chapter 9. Shadows in the Study. The manor had grown quieter as evening descended, though the shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, creeping along the walls and pooling in corners like liquid darkness. Ravenswick Manor, which had once been a place of elegance and quiet conversation, now resembled a labyrinth of suspicion. Poirot walked its halls with deliberate care, each step measured, each glance purposeful. He could feel the tension vibrating through the air, an energy born of fear, guilt, and the weight of secrets. The study door, now unlocked and under constant watch, had become the epicenter of his investigation. Poirot entered alone, moving past the polished desk, the shelves, and the traces of disturbed dust he had meticulously noted earlier. His eyes lingered on the spot where the hidden recess had been revealed, now empty again. Whoever had taken the journal or the pages that remained was clever, precise, and possibly bold enough to remain in the house. Poirot's attention was drawn to a faint scuff on the carpet near the desk, almost imperceptible but telling. He knelt, brushing it lightly with his fingers. "Someone has returned more than once," he murmured. "And yet they leave the smallest trace. A careful hand, but a hand that cannot resist leaving the tiniest proof." He rose and moved toward the window, looking out at the gardens now darkened by the approaching night. The rain had left the ground damp, reflective, and the faint footprints of earlier comings and goings were visible in the mud outside. But the prints he sought, the ones that might belong to the intruder, were absent. Either the person had left by an unseen path, or they were still in the house. A soft creak echoed from the doorway. Poirot turned, noting the presence of Marion, the young maid who had seen the shove earlier. Her face was pale, eyes wide, and hands wringing nervously in front of her apron. "Mademoiselle Marion," Poirot began, voice calm, "you have observed much already. But I must ask if you have seen or heard anything unusual since this morning?" She shook her head rapidly. "No, Monsieur Poirot, only footsteps sometimes when I am not supposed to hear them. I swear I have not been lying." "Fear is a truthful companion," Poirot replied gently. "You need not speak unless the gray cells of truth guide you." Marion hesitated, then whispered, "Last night, I thought I saw a figure near the gallery. It moved too quickly for me to tell, but it was wearing a dark coat." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Dark coat. Precisely the description of the thread found in the hidden recess. "You are certain?" "Yeah, I think so," she said, voice trembling. "Très bien. That is helpful." Poirot nodded and let her leave, knowing she was more frightened than dangerous. The real threat, he sensed, was calculated and unrelenting. He turned back to the desk, studying the arrangement of papers, the blot of ink on the blotter, the faint aroma of ink and pine from the earlier cleaning. Each item told a story if one could read it. Poirot's gaze then fell upon the fireplace. Though it was damp from the lingering humidity, a faint trace of soot clung to the grate. The smell of burned paper was unmistakable. He crouched, examining the remnants of ash. A corner of charred paper clung stubbornly to the hearth. Poirot lifted it carefully. The words were partially legible. "Cannot trust anyone. Midnight will reveal." His brow furrowed. Midnight again. The same time as the previous contradictions. It was clear now that Ambrose Raleigh had known something vital, something that others would kill to keep hidden. A sudden sound behind him made Poirot pivot sharply. The door had moved slightly. He froze. A shadow had passed across the threshold. He did not startle. Instead, he waited. The figure did not advance. A soft footstep retreated. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, the intruder tests the room." He followed the shadow's trace to a small writing cabinet against the wall. Its top drawer, usually locked, had been carefully pried open. Inside, nothing remained, yet the subtle scent of perfume lingered faintly. Poirot sniffed thoughtfully. An attempt to mislead, and yet a mark of character. Too feminine for Captain Ward, too deliberate for Hemsley. And not Lady Celestine. Perhaps Miss Blackwood. He pressed gently against the cabinet. A secret mechanism clicked, revealing a thin panel behind which lay another scrap of charred journal. Poirot picked it up with care. The words were partially legible. "If discovered, must be stopped. Dark coat." The phrase confirmed what he had long suspected. The intruder was aware of Poirot's investigations and feared exposure. This person was watching, calculating, and willing to take extreme measures. Poirot straightened and moved to the center of the room. He began pacing slowly, reviewing every clue, every contradiction, every motive he had gathered. Eleanor Fairfax, Gregor Hale, Clara Whitcomb, Captain Ward, Miss Blackwood, Lady Celestine, all had secrets, but only one had both opportunity and motive aligned with the midnight events. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a window sliding open. A faint chill swept the study, rustling the papers on the desk. Poirot turned sharply. Outside, in the fading light, no one was visible, but he sensed a presence. Someone had come too close. Someone with knowledge of both the hidden recess and the stolen journal. He moved to the door and quietly closed it, locking it from inside. Every shadow now seemed a potential observer. Every sound, a warning. Poirot knew the intruder would attempt another move, another theft, before the day's end. He returned to the fireplace, staring into the faint remains of soot. The scattered charred pages told a story in fragments, fragments that suggested deceit, manipulation, and desperation. Each word hinted at betrayal, each missing piece a silent accusation. Poirot felt the threads of the mystery tightening around him, guiding him toward the inevitable confrontation. A distant clock began to toll. The hour was approaching. Midnight. Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. He sensed the culmination of events, the moment when the lies would crumble under the weight of observation and deduction. Yes, he whispered to himself. The shadows have moved, the smoke has cleared, and soon the truth shall be revealed. Poirot stepped away from the fireplace and toward the desk once more, ready to confront whatever awaited him in the darkness of Ravenswick Manor, where the next move would decide the fate of the stolen journal, and perhaps the lives of those within the house. Chapter 10. The Revelation of Midnight. The manor was silent except for the occasional drip of rain from the eaves, a stark contrast to the tumultuous storm that had raged earlier. Ravenswick had become a fortress of shadows, each corridor pregnant with suspicion, each door a potential hiding place for the truth. Hercule Poirot moved deliberately, the weight of the case pressing upon him as heavily as the night itself. The final hour had arrived. Midnight, the time Ambrose Raleigh's secrets had hung in the balance, was nearly upon them. Poirot stood in the long gallery where the portrait of Lord Ambrose had revealed the hidden recess. The charred remains of the journal scraps lay carefully collected in his hands, each fragment a whisper of revelation. He examined them meticulously, aligning the pages and phrases in his mind, connecting the dots of deceit and desperation that had plagued Ravenswick since that fateful night. Every contradiction, every disappearance, every shadowed glance now formed a tapestry, clear, logical, and damning. Inspector Graves appeared at the doorway, looking more tense than usual. "Are you ready, Poirot?" he asked, voice low. Poirot nodded. "Ready, mon ami. But the final revelation requires careful execution. One must prepare the minds before revealing the truth, or chaos will reign." The inspector followed as Poirot summoned all the remaining guests to the gallery. Eleanor Fairfax, Captain Ward, Lady Celestine, Clara Whitcomb, Hemsley, and Miss Arden Blackwood assembled, their expressions a mixture of fear and curiosity. Even Graves himself looked apprehensive, uncertain what the conclusion might reveal. Poirot began, his tone calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, the time has come to speak of midnight, the hour that has caused confusion, fear, and most tragically the death of Lord Ambrose Raleigh." He held up a charred scrap. This journal, hidden behind Ambrose's portrait, contains his final observations, his fears, and, ultimately, the knowledge of who would act to silence him. A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. Poirot continued. "Last night, shortly before midnight, Lord Ambrose confronted a visitor in this very house. The visitor knew of a secret, an illicit transaction, hidden debts, and manipulations that Ambrose intended to expose." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The visitor attempted to retrieve the journal to destroy the evidence. The study's locked door was a ruse, a clever misdirection to suggest no one could have been inside. But someone observed, someone followed, and someone left clues. Small, almost imperceptible, but sufficient for those with keen observation. Eleanor Fairfax shifted nervously. Captain Ward's jaw tightened. Hemsley fidgeted with his hands. Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flicked from one face to the next, noting the micro-expressions. The micro-tells of guilt, fear, and concealment. "Let us recount the timeline," Poirot said, stepping closer to the hearth. Before midnight, Lord Ambrose was alive and active. He was observed adjusting the portrait in the gallery, a mechanism known only to him and perhaps one confidant. At the same time, Monsieur Hemsley witnessed him, though incorrectly recalling the minute. This minor discrepancy created the first illusion of contradiction. Poirot's gaze rested on Miss Blackwood. The journal was removed and partially burned to conceal evidence. Someone knew I would discover the hidden compartment. He turned his attention to Captain Ward. And the smoke from the burned pages was the misdirection, an attempt to imply destruction without retrieval. Poirot's voice softened slightly as he addressed the room. Now we arrive at the key moment. The shove. Lord Ambrose's fall was not accidental. The assailant sought to prevent further exposure. But here is the crucial detail. The perpetrator did not anticipate my arrival at the scene immediately afterward. They left evidence, the thread from the dark wool coat, the faint footprint near the hidden recess, and the charred journal fragment. A tense silence enveloped the room. Poirot then stepped toward the center, and his gaze rested with precision on one figure. "The person responsible," he said, voice low but deliberate, "is Miss Arden Blackwood." A gasp escaped the group. Blackwood's face paled, lips trembling. Poirot continued, "You, mademoiselle, knew of Ambrose's journal, and you sought to destroy its contents. You feared that your secret dealings, agreements of financial leverage, manipulations over the foundation, and knowledge of illicit transactions would be exposed." Miss Blackwood opened her mouth, but no words came. Poirot held up the final scrap. "Your own hands betrayed you. The soot on the recess, the charred fragment, the dark wool thread, all point to your deliberate action. You believed your presence remained unnoticed, yet every small gesture, every trace of intent has been observed and recorded." Inspector Graves stepped forward, visibly shaken. "It's true, then. Miss Blackwood, you attempted to burn the journal?" She finally spoke, her voice faint, almost a whisper. I did not mean for him to die. Only to protect myself, my future. I did not shove him. He stumbled when I distracted him." Poirot shook his head gently. "A tragic miscalculation, yes. But your intent and your concealment mark you responsible in the eyes of the law." Blackwood's shoulders slumped as she realized the inevitability. The tension in the room shifted. The weight of suspicion dissipated into the clarity of truth. Poirot turned to the other guests. "The mystery is resolved. The contradictory statements, the locked study, the hidden journal, all threads of a single tapestry now unraveled. No longer need you fear ambiguity." Lady Celestine exhaled, closing her eyes. Captain Ward adjusted his jacket while Hemsley sagged into a chair, relief and shock mingling on his face. Eleanor Fairfax remained poised, though her lips were pressed tightly together. Poirot stepped toward Graves. "Justice is a meticulous art, Inspector. It requires observation, deduction, and patience. Only then can the shadow of doubt be lifted." Graves nodded, a measure of awe in his expression. "Indeed, Poirot, I underestimated your method." Poirot smiled faintly. And now, mes amis, we may leave Ravenswick Manor with the truth laid bare. The midnight that haunted us has revealed itself not as an hour of darkness, but as a catalyst for revelation. He allowed a pause, letting the significance of his words settle over the group. Outside, the storm had cleared completely, leaving the grounds glistening beneath the first light of dawn. The manor, once a labyrinth of deceit and fear, now felt open, exposed, and orderly. Poirot's gaze rested on the horizon. The little gray cells, my friends, have triumphed. Even amidst smoke, shadows, and lies, clarity is attainable, and it is only through observation, through noticing what others overlook, that one finds justice. The guests departed one by one, leaving the house quiet once more. Poirot lingered in the gallery, staring at Ambrose Raleigh's portrait, now replaced and secured. He murmured softly to himself, a note of satisfaction and solemnity in his voice. Midnight reveals all, yes, and all is now known. And with that, Hercule Poirot turned and walked toward the drawing room. The case concluded, the mystery solved, and the manor once again under the calm order that only truth can bring.